It's like
Sister to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Blunt Kelly get caught in the lake. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. Humor pulls the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Steve Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Hello and welcome to the Punch Show. We've got returning guests, Priscilla and Awkward today, and first-time guest, Griff, who you look like you were jamming out to my song.
Oh yeah, man, that's a great song. It's a great song. It's a hit.
Not bad for AI, huh?
No, definitely. Impressive.
So are you ready to step into the light where the real facts glow?
Absolutely. Got it.
So
ready to
I always
go.
like to start off with with an icebreaker for these things. So today's icebreaker is describe your perfect sandwich. I'll go first and give you a chance. Mine is club sandwich with turkey, bacon, the hamburger lettuce, the crunchy lettuce, and French dressing, and mayonnaise.
Okay,
Yeah.
That sounds tasty. So about 2 years ago, I had a major surgery, and the first thing they fed me afterwards was a roast beef sandwich from Jimmy John's, because they didn't have their own like internal, kitchen. They were just getting takeout for that. Mm-hmm. So they fed me this roast beef sandwich, and it was the absolute best thing I'd ever eaten in my life at that point, like religious experience of a sandwich. And I've been kind of chasing that ever since, and I've eaten at Jimmy John's probably a dozen times since that, and it just can't get there. So it would be that roast beef sandwich.
Au jus or anything, or
no, it was just a straight up roast beef, cheddar, lettuce, pickles, something pretty basic as far as submarine sandwiches go. But man, I just haven't been able to quite get back to that for some reason. It was, unfortunate, but so yeah, probably that sandwich, ideally.
There you go. What about Awkward?
that was like the toughest intro question yet. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm gonna just cheat. Like, I was vegan for a really long time, and meat still kind of freaks me out.
It doesn't have
Because
to
of
be meat,
like, well, no, I know, but like that, my first thought was turkey also. And I do eat some meat now. I got like dangerously skinny, but I'm still pro vegan. But I would still, just on behalf of my vegan friends too, and because I was born eating one of these, I'm gonna say a bagel with cream cheese.
Ooh,
even if it's not a sandwich.
Hey, it's two slices of bread with something in between them. So if
All
a
right.
hot dog
Good.
is a sandwich,
Yeah,
then
that's what
bagel
I
with
was
cream
thinking.
cheese is a sandwich.
Okay, good.
And what about Priscilla?
Sandwiches, I love them because they're just on the go and simple. And I have to say that my favorite sandwich really is grilled cheese with mozzarella and tomatoes.
Ooh.
Tomatoes, and spinach if available, but I will just deal with the tomato.
Grilled cheese is pretty banging.
I'm just gonna humble brag here, and without any humility, I have been working on the best way to grill cheese a sandwich, and I think I found it.
Oh,
It's because I always find that either what happens is you get the outside part just right, and the cheese doesn't melt all the way, or the cheese melts all the way and the outside gets burnt. So actually I got this from That Dude Can Cook, his channel on YouTube. And
Not Action Bronson.
Watched it.
Mhm.
But what you do is you start it off in the broiler, get the cheese to melt, put the bread together, then you grill it. And then you get the toast just right, and you get the cheese all nice and melted.
I
And it
like.
works if you have it with like meat in it too.
I put weights on the bread. Like I have like a thing to tenderize
Like
meat.
a sear press.
Yeah.
Okay. I usually just grill it open face. I put each of the slices of bread in there by itself and then put the cheese on one of the slices of bread, grill it open face so it gets nice and toasted. And then when the cheese heats up a little more that way, I find, and then you flip it, you put the other piece on it and flip it over. Go from there.
Lots of learning today.
Uh-huh. We're going to learn
Important
about sandwiches.
subjects. Yeah.
Should have invited Talia Levine. Man, she's an expert on this kind of stuff.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, she's doing a series about sandwiches on her timeline on Blue Sky. It's amazing.
Who is?
Her name's Talia Levine. She's written a few books. One of them is called Wild Faith, and it's about the Christian right and how this developed into what it is now. It's I had her on the podcast a couple months back, and it was just an extensive research on where we are and how we got here when it comes to these people making policy now. So
interesting.
The worst people making policy.
Essentially, it
is okay. So this is actually, so let's use this to segue into the next segment, which is this. Let's start off with the the big beautiful bill, which with serious quotation marks around that beautiful. I guess beauty is all in the eye of the beholder, right? But I was wondering, like, if you were to ask some of these Christian right people, if your tax dollars pay for an undocumented worker to get Medicaid supplement because they have emergency medical care to save their baby during childbirth, would you be okay with that? Like, if you had to choose between the life of an undocumented baby being born and, like, what would you do? Like, I just think that this whole pro-life thing, this bill is really anti-life, and I don't think that they're being honest about that.
Well, I think the best way to look at it is it's pro the right kind of life, right? They're totally pro-life as long as it's the right kind of life that you're talking about here.
You mean like white people?
Essentially. And that's the overarching theme. It's like the people we want in this country versus the people we don't want in this country. And if it's somebody who goes to their particular church or is a member of their affinity group, of course they'd want that. But if it's somebody who's not a part of the club, as it were, then no, that person you're screwed. Go away.
But I mean, this is like what America has always been, right? That's why we all have allergy problems, because all the trees in our cities, are all male trees. Because God forbid you have a tree that flowers and provides fruit for free for people.
No kidding, right?
That's why they cut away all social benefits, because they don't want anyone of color to be able to benefit from them. Mm-hmm. So this is just another extension of what the country has always been. And this is why I kind of get a little nutty when people are like, this is unconstitutional, or this isn't who America is. It's like, no, this is like when you build a land on genocide, this is where you end up. Like, if nothing else that we've learned from the American experiment is like, it will still come back to hurt everyone, even the white people that you are professing to be protected, Right. But they really only want the right kind of white people. They want white people who have money. That's it. Like, that's who it is. That's who wrote the Constitution. That's why, like, we should have a rewrite of the Constitution in a real way, where people who are never supposed to, seen as having agency and political power should be at the table drafting the principles that we live by. But the imperfect version that we have right now is still not going to save us from what's happening right now.
In 1983, I was living in Liberia, West Africa, and they had recently had a coup, and I was in high school there. And I worked, I was on my high school paper, and I started interviewing some of the senior staff members at the embassy there. And one of them was a guy named Marshall McCauley, who was the political officer. And Liberia was in the process of writing its constitution. And so I was interviewing him, and he asked me, if you were to write the Constitution, if you were to rewrite a Constitution,
Mhm.
For America, would it be exactly the same as it is today? And my immediate reaction was no. There's all kinds of things I wouldn't do. But I've been thinking about that for 40 years now, 42 years, thinking about that question. If I were going to write a constitution, what would it look like? Because I think that is a really essential question that most people don't really consider. Like, what should government do? Like when people say, oh, government is too big. And I'm just like, too big for what?
Yeah.
Like, too is a relative word. Is it too big or is it not big enough? It all depends on what you think the government should do.
I mean, I live in a rent stabilized apartment because of a state level constitutional convention in the 1930s in New York State. We can do a lot of great things that actually help people instead of put a bunch of rules together that just funnel people into jail, which is what the right wing wants.
So how do we convince those people at the, shall we say, pleb level of the right wing that this is in their best interests? That's been the question that has been haunting me for decades, is like, this is obviously something that would be good for you and everybody you know. You don't know anybody in that club, but you vote for them anyway. How do we convince you that this is not beneficial to your interests on any level and that you have more in common with the people on this other side of it? How do you convince these people? How do you reach out to them?
Medicare for all, like give them a sense of power. I mean, that's the whole thing about 2020, right? And the uprisings, that people actually had a sense of power, and very quickly big things were taken care of. Very quickly we all got a lot of money so we could stay home. Very quickly we had free transportation. Very quickly we had all kinds of things to support us, and a measure of like what kind of Medicare for all could look like with free vaccines and testing. So yeah, I don't know. I just think everything comes back to Medicare for all, since everybody's in jail because they're suffering problems and challenges. People aren't able to like step back and be present with their family and friends and communities. And a lot of that is because we just don't have support for people's mental health care, and living under capitalism kind of, is deregulating at the very least.
Yeah, when they had that march, the M4A march, there was some side stuff that complicated things, and I ended up not going there. I was going to go to the New York City one to speak, but I did do a song for it, and it was definitely, if not biographical, it was, autobiographical. It was inspired by my own life. I didn't focus on my own mental health stuff that, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I just published a little essay on. But I talked about my daughter being sick and robbing a CVS or pharmacy or whatever to get her medication. And that was biographical, not autobiographical. That did happen and does happen. And I hear a lot in rap songs, CVS's and Walgreens remain a target. That line specifically. So it's not just those, but I think you made a really good point with Medicare for all, and just we all regular people have to decide between food and shelter and healthcare, and that is outrageous. And no matter which one we choose, or which two, whatever it is we choose, we're missing something key to survival, which leads us to committing crimes. The real criminals are the corporate, leaders, the CEOs, the billionaires, the ones that are considered criminalized and caged and disappeared and othered forever. Those are people who are typically doing what they have to do to survive, to do what they have to do because of an addiction that was caused by trauma, that was caused by poverty. We just ignore all of the underlying issues and all of the causes.
Yeah. And I don't think I don't believe in a fantasy world where we wouldn't have any problems at all if we made, basic
Nor I.
thing. but I think there would be a lot less of it, you know. And you have RFK Jr. He was just talking about, oh well, you know, people are eating all these processed foods because they're cheaper, and in the long term they end up being more expensive. And it's like, yes, dude, being poor is expensive as hell. Like they're not eating cheaper foods because they're cheaper. They're eating cheaper foods because that's what they can afford to eat. Like, you can't just go to the grocery store and buy fresh produce if you're on SNAP benefits, and especially if your SNAP benefits are getting cut. Like, you
And
have
all,
to make choices somewhere. And
and
it's
all,
like, then
yeah,
those choices lead to bad health. And then the bad health leads to not being able to work. And it's like all those things get connected. And they don't want to, like, say, you know, if there's like a minimum, there's a ground. We're the richest country in the world, and right now we are one of the worst offenders. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Gini index, but it's like a index of how much wealth inequality there is. And of all of the first world nations, or all the wealthy nations, we are the worst in the world. And we're closer to South Africa, the worst country in the world, than we are to, you know, like even the top 10. Like, we're really, really bad in that. And we're supposed to be the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And we have people that we can't feed, can't give health care, and are complaining about even trying to do it.
but the government's also complicit in setting up programs and encouraging monoculture with farmers. You know, part of the reason that we have all these crap junk foods is because farmers have been incentivized for decades to only grow corn and soy so that they can get into fillers for products. But also, I wanted to also make the point that
the corn syrup.
Yeah, the corn syrup, exactly. But it also, if we had more unions in this country and people actually had a sense of agency and power in their workplaces, like, the jump from that to rewriting a constitution that's led by the people is not actually that far. You know, emergency workplace committee is a great place for people to go if they want to be like, you know what, I work in this ice cream shop. It needs to be unionized. Let's do it. You just go to their website and they'll hook you up with an organizer.
So, Griff, what do you think when people compare unions to communism?
I think that the right in this country has done an absolutely fabulous job of turning the brand of socialism into a dirty word. It's the kind of thing that, like, if you explain to people the benefits involved here and don't call it that, you can get almost anyone that's not completely bought in to sign off on, oh yeah, that would be great. We should do this. We should do these things. But then you tell them that these are, in theory, socialist principles, and they freak out because they have been conditioned over all of these years to equate that with, you know, being a Marxist in a lot of cases. And they've done a hell of a job of making that sound like the worst thing that it could ever be. Like, I'm seeing people justifying, to some extent, over on the other side, the apartheid regime in South Africa because they had backing from the former Soviet Union. And it's kind of like, gee, amazing that the Soviet Union would see something that was completely unjust and figure out a way to get in there. Amazing. Crazy. But you find yourself thinking that people buy this stuff and it's a branding problem. That if they simply found a way to sell it that didn't have all the baggage, this would be a lot more doable.
I mean, it's
how
also
much of that do you think is the fallout of, you know, like, people talk about the Democrats' messaging, and I'm not trying to defend everything the Democrats ever say and do, but I feel like so much of the messaging is conditional on what the media repeats. Like, I did a little video on, you know, like, why you should vote for Kamala Harris before the 2024 election. And I just cited what her actual policies were. And I had MAGAs saying, this is so great. Why isn't she talking about it? And I'm like, well, she is talking about, but the media is not talking about what she's talking about. They're talking about what she's not talking about. So, I mean, like, to me, the whole messaging thing is like, it's filtered through a largely conservative media. And even the so-called left media tries to, like, self-moderate. So, you know, you have both Fox and MSNBC spending like half their time criticizing Joe Biden, and then they're like, why doesn't anybody believe that the economy is getting better? So how do you fix that? How do you fix what's going on with the media?
Well, I think that we're all here because to some extent we have bought into the idea that this is not what the media has to look like. Some of you are probably familiar with a musician, spoken word artist, a guy by the name of Jello Biafra, who sang for the Dead Kennedys for years. One of his biggest quotes for years was, "Don't hate the media, become the media." And I think a lot of us have tried to internalize that, the idea of, okay, so if the media isn't covering the things that you think are necessary and are crucial to be talking about, we're in an era now where you can get your own voice out there for almost nothing in terms of the production quality and the cost. I mean, if you've got a smartphone, and almost everybody does, you can start your own podcast. You can go out there and you can say what you have to say. Is it going to look great? Not necessarily, but you know what? It doesn't matter, because you're not out there trying to make it look great. You're trying to get out there and get your point across to people and the things that you think are interesting. And I think a lot of the answer is simply making it smaller, making it a thing where people who are interested in a subject can go out and talk about whatever the subject is that they're interested in and not have to be gate kept out of it anymore. And we saw this with the 2024 election, where it turned out that various influencers were having a bigger impact on voting and turnout than the networks were at that point. People buy what their favorite influencer or what their favorite podcaster says about a subject more so than they buy what Jake Tapper says about it, which, understandable, because Jake Tapper's kind of in the tank for a few things. If you've seen his exchanges with Chris Rufo, you can tell that dude is just, oh, hey, hello, it was great. Yeah, I didn't really mean it. But, and now he's got his book out on Biden. But I think the answer is that you have to get to the point where people have options that really aren't motivated so much by the profit end of things. People are out here telling a story that they think is interesting, and they're trying to put that across because they think it needs to be told, not because they ever figure they're going to get rich. Because I don't think any of us are ever going to get rich doing this.
That being said, we should have money that comes to us from the federal government, much like, countries in Europe subsidize musicians. Like, people who create media should have money coming to them to support that work. Like,
right. And it would be great. It would absolutely be ideal if that was the case. But with the way things work in this country, I don't ever see it happening.
Hey, I've made $67 off of my YouTube channel. So, I've made a whopping $67. So
that is where the unions.
I'm like rolling in the cash right now. Sorry.
I was just going to say that is where the unions can be helpful. I mean, in addition to being critical to like a general strike, with things like people like us not making money when a client screws me or a publisher screws me and I do work for them and they don't pay me, that's when I go to the union and say, I need your help. And I mean, some of them are effective to some degree at that. It's quite different from what Priscilla envisions, and which would be far better, like a UBI for everyone. And then like you create news, somehow that comes back to you. Like, I don't mean create news, you share the news, you tell the stories. I mean, but like, of course they're not going to do that, because I mean, with people like us, the stories we're telling are the ones they're trying to bury. That's a big part of the problem. So wherever the money would come from, it certainly wouldn't be the government. At least in this government.
Let's take it out of the military. 10% away from the military.
I mean, I would love to not pay taxes till they stop spending it all on war and cages and cops. I mean, I remember being at I think it might have been George W. Bush's inauguration in DC like 100 years ago. And I remember people passing out fake money. And I'll never forget, because it like really stood out among all the crap that's going on at all of these things, both good and bad. And I looked at it, and it was like something I don't remember. It was a long time, but it was like, don't pay your taxes. Like, as long as we don't get to pick what our taxes are going to, don't pay. So like the dollar bill was just a delivery method of that message, but that stuck with me for 20 plus years.
So let's go on to the next topic, and this one is, I was so pissed off. Like, I mean, I was just apoplectic at Donald Trump's performance in the Oval Office with the president of South Africa, accusing him of reverse apartheid. This is a man that actually went to jail because he was fighting apartheid. And you're accusing him of apartheid based on white supremacist fear mongering and hyperbolic statements and just disinformation. And he's doing that in the Oval Office. He's doing that representing the country. He's not just doing it on his Twitter account. The way that they what's the word? Ambushed him. You know, this was not something that just came up in the spur of the moment. They had a video ready to go that had like fake disinformation on it. They had like one of the pictures he was showing was actually like people from Congo. And anyway, I was so upset that this was going on. And so I was just considering, and I want to get you guys' opinion on this. One of two possibilities. Either one, they knew this was all false and they did it anyway, which would be evil. And if they didn't know what it was and did it anyway, then that's gross incompetence. So they were either grossly incompetent or just evil. Which do you think it is?
I don't think Trump cares about anything. I think he's...
Oh, no, I'm talking about his handlers. That like, he didn't put that video together.
They don't care. They're just doing whatever they're told to do. They literally don't care. They have no soul. They have no sense of accountability for themselves or anybody around them.
Yeah.
They're break laws until they're in prison.
I mean, I can agree with that without agreeing with the term evil. I don't believe in evil. I won't belabor this like I always do as the abolitionist, but I do believe that the current version of
malicious. How is it malicious?
I mean, yeah, like I didn't mean to correct you, man. Like, believe me, no, like very few people will hear things the way that I do. Anyway, but like, yes. Definitely malicious, and this version of these people working for that man and that institution, no question, everything Priscilla said is right. Absolutely.
So you're both saying they just didn't. It's not whether they knew it wasn't true.
They
or not.
met well,
they just
right?
Didn't care if it was true or not.
Well,
care.
yeah, like whether it's true or not is less important to them than following orders.
Yep. Doing their job.
Yeah.
But do you think it came
it's
from
all
Trump
for
and
the
went to them,
end
or did it come
goal,
from
you
them
know?
and go to Trump?
I think it came from Stephen Miller, if we're being honest about this. If you want to name where I think this came from. And the reason I think it came from Stephen Miller is because the white farmer genocide trope is a conspiracy theory that started in the white nationalist sphere in the mid 2010s. At this point, you are seeing it in places like VDARE, AMREN, the various white supremacist and white nationalist commentary sites, the supposed intellectual side of all of this stuff. And we know Stephen Miller's a fan. I have interviewed people like Katie McHugh, who's a former, editor at Breitbart, who has now left them and has been doing everything she can to fight them ever since. And she told us that Stephen Miller, when he was the editor at Breitbart, gets a list every day of every person with a Hispanic last name that showed up in a police blotter anywhere in this country sent to him. Stephen Miller has been wanting to do this for quite some time. And I think that they really believe in the idea of a white nation. They're trying to get to the point where that is what we are, that is what we have. And I think that they know, at least at that level, full well what they're saying and what this comes off as when they say it. To them, it's almost like, holy writ that this is actually happening. And I believe that because they have shown that they are tied into these sources where the conspiracies are being hatched in the first place. I was actually talking to somebody else who was a woman named Samantha, who was at one point, we have a lot of formers on the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. We've had a lot of people who've been involved in the hate movement and have walked away. And we try to extensively vet that. We're not trying to give anybody who hasn't really done the work a platform to come back out and say whatever they want. But we were talking to a woman named Samantha, who was at one point the women's director of a group called Identity Europa. And she mentioned to me last night that everything that was completely militant and on the edge of everything that she believed in 2017 when she was associated with that movement is basically a mainstream GOP talking point now. That we have gone in, 8 years from, oh my God, that's alt-right stuff, to the alt-right functionally not being a thing anymore, but they don't need to be, because those talking points and ideas have moved into the mainstream of the GOP. They won, at least on that side of things. They won that argument. And
I like to say Donald Trump is the Overton window.
It's moved. The Overton window is now at a place where you can say things about white genocide on, an interview with the South African president when you're talking to him, and that media doesn't bat an eye. Whereas if you said this in 2017, you would lose your job. Look at Darren Beattie, the speechwriter for Trump at the time, who lost his job for speaking at a white nationalist conference, essentially. And now he's a special liaison at the State Department, making enemies lists. He's back.
Now they've got a mandate to be white supremacists. Now they've got a mandate, right? They always say
absolutely
mandate.
Think they do.
So it seems like you're well versed on this. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how the whole, you mentioned it got started in the like the 1910s, like I think it was 1917 that the Newsmax Australia or whatever that's called, the Murdoch Murdoch news channel there.
Well, later than that, but in the mid 2000 aughts to about 2010, this stuff was starting to percolate. There were various columns that were being written about the genocide of South African farmers, about how these people were under threat because of essentially the fallout from the apartheid regime. And this stuff got bigger. We had a guy named Evan McLaren, who was also a former, on talking about how he was at the first meeting of the H.L. Mencken Club, which was a lot of these guys. Richard Spencer was there, a number of other people. And they talked about putting some of these ideas together. And I think it was 2009. I'd have to go back there and check that. But they have gone from a very fringe part of political discussion to absolutely dominating the conversation now. They have somehow moved that Overton window to the point where we're now talking about, white genocide. We're talking about replacement birth rates. We're talking about FBI crime statistics, the stuff that you used to be an absolute non-entity if you insisted you wanted to talk about. The stuff that they ran Sam Francis out of the GOP for talking about, the stuff that was too edgy for Pat Buchanan back in the day, is now the absolute mainstream of that party. And I think that people don't realize just how far that's come. I used to believe in the concept of, there's GOP moderates out there. Maybe there are, but I think that they're awfully quiet these days. And they're not saying
the GOP moderates left the GOP.
Yeah, they're Democrats now.
Yeah.
Like there's people like Joe Walsh, right? Who is
Bill
definitely
Kristol.
A conservative and definitely right. But even Joe Walsh was like, hey, I can't have anything to do with this.
It's interesting where that guy's lines are. It really is. You look at Joe Walsh and his career, and it's kind of like, you're good with slurs. You're good with calling people some really horrible stuff. You're good with throwing trans people under the bus. Where is your line exactly that you're saying don't do this? Where is your line? I can't handle this anymore. What was it for you? What was your
It is a
big
good
issue that
question.
made you quit? I'm just curious because there's so much of it that's like right up his alley, it seems like. And again, I don't say this to pick on Joe Walsh. I say this, the same thing I've said about Adam Kinzinger, who is on the record saying really terrible things about Obama and saying he was going to vote for Trump in his first term and any number of other things. That it's kind of like, okay, so did they tell you you're not in the club? Is that what's going on? Did they kick you out of the club or something? Why are you now upset with this? And I mean, I'm glad to have you. Don't get me wrong here, guys like that. I'd rather have you here than there. But at the same time, why? Why now? What was it?
The other thing we have to understand is that all of this stuff has been building for many decades. In the same way that like half of the country doesn't have legal abortion now, which is insane to me as somebody who was a 90s baby. That was a campaign that started basically the minute Roe v. Wade was passed. They just started hammering the pro-life drumbeat, and it's coming from the same place of control, and the same complicitness of the Democrats who insisted on building bridges with racists and people who want people of color to die. Literally, either die or be enslaved in some way. And they've rebranded slavery as prison terms, and they just keep shoving people into these buildings for no reason. Yeah, I don't know. It's all the same stuff. Like, you follow like how women have been treated in this country since Roe v. Wade was passed. And it was like we had a small bump in the 80s that was, totally fought against and documented in the book Backlash by Susan Faludi. And now we're back to that place. We're literally back to that place.
Well, it makes me think of like the 90s, and like one of the things that started us on this push right was Rush Limbaugh. And one of his favorite terms was feminazis.
Yeah.
And he was basically saying, like, if you're a female that thinks you have rights, then you're a Nazi. Like, how dare you insist that you're equal with me?
Because
what's that?
Because women tend to be more collaborative. We tend to work together well. We tend to think of things of like, how do we sustainably take care of each other rather than sell off all the bodies to profit, which is what the right wing wants to do.
Well, when my wife gets mad at me and she says that, and she'll say, I don't do that. And I'll say, well, that's just because you're a better person than me. And then she doesn't know how to respond to that.
I have this secret, not so secret plan. I think that if we had 100 years of matriarchy around the world, we would have a fundamentally different human society. Just remove men from power in every single place for 100 years, just 100 years, just a little rebalance, and we see what would emerge.
Do you know the Robin Williams quote on that?
No. What did he say?
He said, he said, we should just have all women in charge all over the world. And that way we would never have any wars. Just every 28 days, there would be very intense negotiations.
Well, I mean, that's only talking about premenopausal women. The menopausal orcas are actually the leaders of the pods. So menopausal women don't have that kind of fluctuation.
There you go. Then we don't even have to worry about the intense negotiation.
No.
My dad's favorite T-shirt said "War is menstrual envy." And he wore that out. Yeah, I was very proud of him.
Literally, like it's just because men can't produce and sustain life in the same way. They're all bent on controlling it a different way, and their version of control is to kill people.
Yeah, I mean, it's not funny at all, but.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about is, okay, so last night Trump had this dinner where he made, we don't even know how much money, we don't know how many people were there, but basically he pimped out the White House for millions of dollars, and pimped out access to him for millions of dollars. And then there's the gift that is, they're saying it's to the government, but he is the only one that will ever use it. And so, there's this, and I know Priscilla's probably going to say, well, the Constitution sucks anyway, but, like there's this whole thing called the Emoluments Clause in it, which says that you can't receive the gift from a foreign government without approval from Congress. And so, Awkward, you've done the least amount of talking, so it's your turn. You get to take this one first. Thoughts on the Emoluments Clause in Trump?
I don't have much to say on that in particular, really. I don't know enough, but I will say that it's not fully a joke that the Constitution sucks. I mean, one of my favorite people, Noel Cook, who will hopefully join us on this show next week, and who will be publishing a book soon on extremism amongst women around this time. Like, her work started around January 6th, and it turned into a book and a film. And anyway, her husband is also an author and scholar. He's a professor. His name is Terry Boughton, and he talks a lot. His forthcoming book is about the Constitution, and I can't really divulge more than that, but there is a ton of, like, the reality behind that is that the creators of the Constitution all thought that the British form of government that they had escaped was the best form of government. They really wanted a dictatorship very similar to what we're getting today. So even with all of the stuff that we see in there, we're going to find out pretty soon what was really going on.
So what do you think, Griff, about the Emoluments Clause in Trump?
Well, I think it's like a lot of laws. It only works if somebody decides they're going to enforce it. And if there is no enforcement mechanism, which, in theory there is, but I don't really see it happening, then the answer is Trump can do pretty much whatever he wants, and he is busy doing that. The idea of him receiving this plane is just such a bad idea. It's not even worth talking about. There's so much wrong with this that it's like anybody with, 2 IQ points to slap together can see that this is just the worst idea possible. But somebody at some point needs to stop them from profiting on this. People need to go to jail. People need to go under the jail for a good long time. Once that happens, then, like the old quote, to warn the others, then they'll start thinking, okay. But I saw it said this morning, I think it was like Chris Hayes from MSNBC said something on Blue Sky this morning about, if you knew what Trump was going to post, you could make millions on the stock market. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, obviously. It seems like people have been doing that for a number of years now. Like, if you knew what he was going to say, sure, you could short any number of things and probably get completely rich. And I'd be willing to bet you everybody in his inner circle has been doing it. It's so obvious that, if you could think of it, they have, because that's what these people do, is think of ways to make money. And they're not particularly concerned with the legality. To them, the legality is when somebody throws them in jail. That's what they're, going to stop. And when we get to a point, and we can argue that Merrick Garland should have locked a lot of these people up. He should have figured out a way to file charges in a lot of these cases and lock them up. And I agree with that. But right now, Attorney General Pam Bondi isn't going to do anything about any of this stuff. And we have to come to terms somehow with the idea that it's going to be lawless until we can figure out a way for it not to be. And I hate to sound cynical. I really hate to sound as hard-bitten and cynical as I'm sure I do. But you look at the situation and you're like, we need these people out. Nothing's going to change until these people are not in power and don't have the reins to this. So the Annulments Clause, yes, this is a great idea, and I wish that we were actually enforcing it. I absolutely agree with the need for this, and the minute they start putting some teeth into it, and I think that that's the thing. They underestimated what it would be like if somebody got in who just didn't care, just had no respect for the rules whatsoever and was just going to go full on Leroy Jenkins about it.
And I think it was like when the Constitution was written, there wasn't the idea of parties being involved. It was like individual senators and representatives representing their states, not a party. And so the idea that a Congress would keep the president in check was more realistic, even though it wasn't realistic. Like in their minds, it was realistic. The way that we have become polarized, and Republicans have just, they're going to back Trump no matter what he does, and that they have the majority in both houses. And, you know, there's no way anybody's ever going to get a veto or a large enough majority in the Senate to impeach anybody, to convict anybody on impeachment. It basically, that check on the president, the congressional check, is just impossible at this point. So,
I mean, you know, back to the Constitution doesn't represent anyone. I'm sorry, I just have to point it out. Like, yeah, while they were setting up the Constitution, they were also genociding First Nations people.
Oh, right.
Right? So, like,
yeah, oh, no, yeah, there's all kinds of crap wrong with the Constitution. Don't get me wrong.
I'd like to push back against this idea that we're in a lawless place, because while Trump has 34 convicted felonies, he has not done a day in incarceration at all. Whereas someone like myself, who is only accused, I haven't even been indicted on a charge. And I've spent like over a month in jail in 2023 as a result. So it's like laws for the people, you know, extreme consequences for people who are doing things that we disagree with, even if it is freedom of speech protected activity. But like, if you're powerful, if you're in the highest place in the land, you can break any law you want to. And that has always been true.
It's just never
Absolutely.
been officially true until now.
Yeah, that's a big difference, maybe, just that like everybody sees it. Like, Priscilla, we've been involved in this, you know, for a really long time. And like, you know, that's part of why I don't, I shouldn't say overreact. That's not fair. The reason I don't react to each of these things that happens, like this, you know, getting a multi-billion-dollar plane or whatever the heck it is, like, I think that this stuff, I'm pretty confident that this stuff has always been going on. And the only difference, and it is a notable difference because it makes it more terrifying how little they have no fear now, is just how much out in the open it is. And just to your point about, you know, your experiences, by the way, you know, if anyone is not listened to your earlier appearance, you might want to give a little more detail on what you're referring to, you know, for those who don't know. But I just love this example. I put it in a song many years ago that when weed was illegal, I got jailed for smoking the peace plant and got a high five for choking kid under street lamp. So the idea is, and both of these things happened, like the cops, for what it's worth, the only reason I beat this kid up is the same reason I beat up anyone. He was sexually assaulting a woman, in my opinion, at a bar. He was harassing her. I could tell she needed help, and that's why I did it. But the cops didn't know that when they came. They saw me beating the shit out of someone, and they thought it was great. Because look at me, that's why. I'm a white guy, you know, like, and so they thought that was fantastic. Meanwhile, like, I was handcuffed and jailed and fingerprinted for smoking weed only, you know, a couple years before that. So what does that say? It's a weird personal example, but like machismo, you know, and anger and violence have always been cool. Like smoking something that's going to calm me down and you caught me doing that is not cool.
I like to say that if MAGA just smoked a couple of joints, things could probably be a lot better.
And stop drinking, you know, like the things that are most legal, most available are the things that are most dangerous for us.
Okay, so let's pivot to Priscilla wanted to talk about two things. The prison break. We'll start with the prison breaks in Louisiana. The prison break in Louisiana. So
So it was a jailbreak. A lot of them were pretrial detainees. They had been there for a while, so they hadn't been found guilty of anything. I think only a few of them were in transit to actual prison. This speaks to the fact that jails are like way worse than prisons in this country. It's insane because they don't have any of the thing. They're not designed to keep people long term, even though that's what's happening now. And so, you know, this jail in Louisiana is crumbling like all jails are around the country right now. And somehow they worked with the staff to escape. And I hope they make it. And I hope they get the fuck out of this country. And I hope they live peaceful lives from now on. I don't care what I literally don't care what they're accused of. I want them out. I want them escaped. I want them living in freedom.
And most people, like, just so we're clear, like the amount of murders, for instance, committed by serial killers is less than 1%. Cops commit 1/3 of all stranger murders. Cops kill 3 to 6 plus people a day. The majority of people in prison are incarcerated on nonviolent charges, and the majority of those are for drugs, and particularly marijuana. So as people rot for having some weed in their car, white people are making a fortune right now that it's legal. And just to add one last comment, since obviously this is my topic, Priscilla made a really good point about it being a jail versus a prison. 75% of the people in jail have not been convicted of a crime.
Wow.
3 out of 4 of those people.
For months
Meanwhile,
there, no indictment.
right.
So
Maybe this is a good time, Priscilla, for you to expound on that, like, because Priscilla's from Occupy Wall Street, and I've known her since then. And she didn't stop there. She went to Atlanta to protect the forest from Cop City. And that's what she's referring to, I believe, most recently being, you know, put away without any kind of, you know, due process. My apologies.
Yeah, they arrested like a bunch of us. They arrested like over 30 of us, maybe over 40. I don't remember trauma. After a music festival in Atlanta, Georgia, South River Music Festival that was being held on the land next to the Cop City development. And
that's noteworthy too. It wasn't even on the land. I didn't realize that. Wow.
No, not on the land. Not on the land. And actually
amazing.
Where it was completely public land. So they can't even try to put me on trespassing. Like, I am not going to plea out. Like, if they try to make me plea out, I'm making them go to jury trial because I was camping on public land. I was doing literally what we did in Occupy and other manifestations since then to try and get attention to really necessary things like the police training, the militarized police training facility in Atlanta that was being built against the wishes of the public. They did not want this. 17 hours of city council testimony, and the city council still voted it through, which I felt deeply as someone who had been around in New York City during the whole Close Rikers camp, during the heart of the Close Rikers campaign in 2018, where there was a full-on takeover in New York City Council by activists, and they still voted through this crazy plan for 5 new jails, which thankfully are not, haven't been really built yet. I think because it became such a toxic thing, which is great. But where was I? So the city of Atlanta and its the corporate funders of the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is one of the largest police foundations in the country. I think it's even bigger than New York City's, which is crazy. These police foundations are founded by companies like Home Depot, like Chase Bank, like Delta Airlines. My Chase account was closed after my arrest in the forest for activity, which I don't know. The only charges that my daughter got shocked by in the discovery were that I had a bunch of these astrological services that I was paying for monthly. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I need the guidance. I don't have family. Like, this is the best way for me to reach my ancestors because I'm crazy." But it works. But yeah, my Chase account was closed. My Airbnb account was closed. I almost lost an account with Flow Code because something's going on with these know your customer rules. And I'm on some lists now. Like, the only reason I got my Flow Code account back was because I know one of the big advisors for the company, and he basically fixed it in a week for me. And so the whole city like pushed back against this cop city. I show up there with other activists as well on the weekend of March 4th. And then by the next night, the end of the next night, I was in DeKalb County Jail charged with domestic terrorism, without any idea when I was going to get out. I did not have a bond. They rejected me for bond 3 times, but yet did not indict me. I'm sitting here in Brooklyn getting jury duty summons. Like, if I'm an actual alleged terrorist, shouldn't I not be going to jury duty? Like, I think that's kind of public safety thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's ridiculous.
Completely.
Yeah, and then I got indicted on RICO because they're trying to RICO political activities now. And before I go down there for the indictment, I really worked with my lawyer to try and make it like a walk-in, walk-out thing like Trump did. But instead, they lost our paperwork in the system and kept shuffling us around the jail for 28 hours.
So, Griff, when you hear
Yes,
that,
sir.
like, and you're kind of into the like exposing right-wing narratives thing, apparently, and you compare that with like how the MAGA treated, or complained about the prisoners, the January 6th prisoners, and like how unfairly they were being treated, and they weren't getting bail and all of that kind of stuff. Like, how did like explain?
So I find
that.
myself listening to Priscilla's story and thinking, as an Occupy vet, you must kind of think that Occupy and what came out of it scared them badly enough that they were going to clamp down the next time something like this happened, again, to send a message, because they don't ever want that happening again. So when the Cop City protests, and I saw that from up here, we interviewed like Kelly Weil from the Daily Beast, who was involved in it as well, and said that, even mutual aid was RICO to them. I found myself thinking they're trying to scare people. They don't want anybody coming near this thing, and they're trying to scare people off from coming anywhere near the next one of these things. Because I'm convinced on some level that what we're going to need to fix this is an Occupy level, get out in the streets and stay there for a while.
When Occupy like ended, when all of the camps were kind of fizzling out, I was talking to a lot of funders to try and get together an organization so that we could continue that level of action in the streets. And one of these funders said to me, well, what is it that your vision is, Priscilla? And I was like, well, honestly, nothing's really going to change until we have hundreds of thousands of people in the street, like every day.
Right. And because this country is so big, because we have so many people so spread out, that's really tough to do outside of a few major metropolitan areas, which is what actually encourages me about the Tesla protests, is that they are happening everywhere. Every Saturday, you can go to any Tesla dealership in this country and see people outside with signs. That's pretty impressive for America, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, no, I think that the real secret, though, right now is for people who are in places where it's kind of safer to shut things down, places like New York, places like Boston, like
I'm in Seattle. It's pretty safe here.
Seattle, yeah. Like, those are that need to be the hotbeds of actually shutting everything the fuck down. And good thing is our ports are in those cities, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's unaligned. So yeah, everybody who lives in a populace that is more friendly to public real public engagement, that really makes things uncomfortable and awkward, if you will. Like, that's where we need to be, out in the streets and shutting things down for real.
Yeah, and to your point, Mr. Kelly, I think that they have been working victim narratives in that side of the fence absolutely forever. It's been a huge part of their recruiting. It's been a huge part of their narrative since, probably the days of Goldwater at the very least, to say you are the victim of a society that doesn't hear you, that doesn't care about you.
Mhm.
And they have themselves a bunch of martyrs now. And that's what they're trying to push as far as the J6ers. They have this ready-made idea that these people are all martyrs and they were all pursued by a corrupt Biden Justice Department, and now they're all free, and we're going to pay off some of them, like Ashley Babbitt's family getting $5 million or whatever it was. It's all, in pro wrestling terms, kayfabe. They know that this is not real, but this is what they are choosing to sell their audience, as it
It's
were.
almost like it's almost like I can hear them complaining, you're treating white people like ordinary black people.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
they're simultaneously running all these ads, attacking Democrats for no cash bail, and then complaining that white people aren't getting no cash bail.
Yeah.
How can you see it any other way?
You can't. And if you want to see what happens in this country when, you really scare them, go look at Cop City.
Yes. Thank you, guys. I hope we are uniting the left as we should.
Do our best.
I'd love to.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell you're doing over there, but I love it.
So Awkward. Before we go, do you want to introduce your guest star there?
Oh,
Or is he still
yeah.
around?
Yeah, sure. Well, Griff is someone whose show I watched.
Oh no! I mean the
You're talking
other
about the cat, man.
Oh
the
my
furry one.
God.
Meow.
This is not that great of a guest star. Hold on.
Oh.
She's very frustrating.
Oh.
She's very sweet, but this particular cat, she's really old and she just yeah.
No.
The way she involves herself is just a little. Here we go. Here's another one.
I hope I
Okay.
don't get flagged for a porn thing.
Here's an even
because
more naked
we
one.
got a good look at her butthole.
That's another naked. That's a really naked one. That one's. So you got to see the oldest and the youngest.
How many cats do you have? How many cats do you have?
Oh boy, 12.
What?
12? Wow.
One of
I
them's
have
my daughter's
two.
who's
I don't
home.
know what I
Yeah,
would do with 12.
I'm
dude. And
trying to
this
get
is not.
my wife into letting me get a second.
Well, this is so that's interesting. I was gonna say this is not an awkward bitch session. However, I didn't ask for this many cats, nor did I ask for the 6 dogs. And I'm the one who works from home, so I'm the one who spends a lot of time with loud barking and and litter boxes. So for anyone who envisions me, who doesn't know me that well, because I'm a pretty poor, humble human being. But if anyone just knows me as a rapper from 20 years ago with groupies or something, just picture me cleaning litter boxes all day long.
So, but go ahead and introduce the primary
All right.
guest star if you want to.
Yeah, so I wanted Griff to come on, one, because he's got a great podcast himself. Actually I did your show, Kelly, right after, and after I did Griff's, and they were the 2 best interviews I've done maybe in 2 decades, and I've done hundreds. And then I've also conducted many where I've been the interviewer. So I was very impressed with both of you guys and really enjoyed the conversations.
Thank you.
And those 2 are my pinned post or whatever.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I wanted Griff to come on too, just because he's got a slightly different background and perspective. From I would say mine and Priscilla's is probably pretty similar. And Griff's is different from ours and different from yours as well. And the fact that, it's very interesting because, I see Griff as being of the, anti-fascist movement that I've been a part. But what's so interesting about a big part of the work that he does is that it's abolitionist in nature, even if he doesn't know it yet. And I don't know if we talked about this actually because we were focused so much on me when I was on your show.
Right.
By inviting the former members of far right extremist groups who have transformed. He is demonstrating my point every single time. Now, when can we change a Donald Trump or an Elon Musk? Highly unlikely. But the at this point in their lives, and with this much power, and with separated so far from reality, but the people that Griff is having on, they're not necessarily very well known until they've escaped.
Yeah.
And so they have these incredible stories of, one, and this is a huge part of it, how they ended up there in the first place, and why I don't blame them. I consider them victims of generations of disinformation.
Yeah.
And then they explain how they escaped and who they are now, and like what they believe, demonstrating again, the transformational power of like education and understanding and all of that stuff. So he's doing an incredible service by highlighting these stories, and he does a
That
good job too. So
that actually, and maybe Griff, if you want to come on at another time, just as a
Sure.
solo guest, I would love that, because
Absolutely.
what I think, what I'm hearing here is, you might have more hope than a lot of people. Like a lot of people I talk to say there's no hope in talking to MAGAs. They're never going to change their mind. And you talk to people apparently all the time that were hardcore, all the way in MAGAs that have changed their mind. So
they make
do
MAGAs
you think there's hope?
look
Yeah,
like
we talked to whatever the
Democrats.
next level is beyond that. I mean, like
Yeah,
my most
yeah.
recent former guest is a guy named Tyler DePepe, who was a member
Love
of the Atomwaffen division.
that. And if
Tyler
you don't
was
know Atomwaffen, they were killers. Like
Mhm. They
Andy
have a
No
body
sent
count.
a kill list to Atomwaffen that Griff and I might have been on, for all we know.
Maybe.
Moving on.
So basically, Tyler is a trans man. The Atomwaffen folks had no idea. They didn't know that. And it blew apart their Florida organization when they figured it out. Tyler now lives, not going to say, but Tyler lives with a group that's dedicated. It's a guy named Scott Kelly Ernest. They're dedicated to getting people out of that movement. Scott used to be himself a former Stormfront moderator. He's been a part of that whole scene for years, but he walked away from it years ago and now does everything he can to fight it. And I think that we have to be able to have a redemption track for people who have been involved in that, because otherwise there's no point in ever leaving. If you can't walk away from it and say, yeah, I messed up, I harmed people, the stuff I did really actually hurt people, and I need to somehow atone for that, then you don't have a whole lot of point in leaving. Like I mentioned Katie McHugh earlier, and Katie, when she left, she had been a direct report under Stephen Miller. She had been a direct report for a while under Tucker Carlson. And when she left, she turned her hard drive and files, all of her emails, over to the SPLC. And they wrote some
What is
pretty
the
amazing
SPLC?
articles as a result of that.
What is the SPLC?
Southern Poverty Law
Southern
Center.
Poverty Law Center.
SPLC. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
right.
she turned her emails over to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they were able to publish quite a bit of why we know exactly just how racist Stephen Miller is. Well, because we have his emails, because we know the kind of thing he says when he thinks no one's watching. And that's the kind of work that you like to see out of people who have left the movement, who have figured out ways to either get people out in their way, or to try and hurt them somehow, to try and take what they do apart. And maybe I'm being weird here, but it definitely feels good to see guys like Brad Griffin from, Occidental Descent and the League of the South getting really, really pissed off at somebody we interviewed and blasting it all over his page. It's kind of like, you're upset. You're really upset. That's funny. I think it's great because you're mad and you're still promoting the podcast, dipshit. So
Love that.
But yeah, I really think it's important. And I think that it isn't necessarily a binary. A lot of these people aren't necessarily MAGA. A lot of these people have their own kind of way that they got into this. It had nothing to do with traditional GOP politics at all. But I think that there's a lot of people who are, just normal Trump voters who, if you can kind of keep them close, keep them at a point where you don't necessarily discuss politics, you don't necessarily discuss any of this kind of stuff, give them an out. Don't isolate them. Because if you isolate them, they end up even farther into the movement, whatever that be it white nationalism or be it MAGA. Because the MAGA folks have learned some lessons from the white nationalists. They have absolutely learned some lessons about how to run what they do. And to your point, what's worse, Nazis or people who use Nazis to achieve their goals? People who run Nazis to achieve their goals, because that's what the Trump administration has done and was doing, especially in the beginning. They were using the Charlottesville guys. They were using people like Richard Spencer to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. Spencer's bad, but what do you say about a guy like Jack Posobiec, who is fully aware of what Richard Spencer is and what he does, and yet uses him to achieve the Trump administration's policy goals? That's the guy that on some level I think is irredeemable. People like him that are prepared to use, one of the most hateful philosophies that's ever come down the pike in order to achieve their own goals. That's the guy that I view really truly as the enemy.
Yeah,
Like
I say there are the deceivers and there are the deceivers, right, and there are the deceived. The deceived we can try to reach out to. The deceivers, sure, I just don't have time for.
They're going to have to figure it out for themselves if they ever do. They're not showing any indication that they ever actually want to change or do anything differently. For them, it's too profitable. I mean, take Jack. He's gone from being like a Game of Thrones shit poster to a guy who gets to go on like trips with the Secretary of State to Ukraine. He's published several best-selling books. At least, they probably astroturfed it, but he's published books that sold. He's a well-known pundit now. This thing has paid off great for him. He's done really, really well for himself. Why would he change that?
There's money in leaning into that.
There absolutely is. And what we talked about earlier, there should be people paying people like us money. Yeah, that'd be great. But a lot of the money in that world comes from rich old white guys like Foster Freeze, like the Beck brothers in Texas, people that are just have some kind of business interest in keeping this going. So they pay guys like that, guys like Charlie Kirk, TPUSA, to do what they do and change the narrative so they can pass things like the big beautiful bill and get their tax break.
There's a guy going off in the comments section here about, racism against white people is okay and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to put him on the screen, but just that general topic. How would you address that? Assuming that the person is actually well-intentioned and really feels that white people are being persecuted or something. How would you respond to that?
I think that's where dialogue comes into it. I think you have to sit down and you have to say, okay, you feel like white people are being persecuted. How? What do you feel is persecution here? And you have to hear that person out. If you really want to have that conversation, you have to hear that person out. You're not going to be able to shout them down. You have to hear what they have to say, and you have to be, prepared to address it. You have to be prepared to say, okay, I see what you're saying here, and ask some follow-up questions. Is this because of this? Is this because of this? Okay, where did you get to this point? And a lot of the time, I'm amazed at how often this stuff comes down to one or two personal incidents. You look at somebody's background and like they got beat up by black kids in high school, and therefore they are kind of racist for the rest of their life as a result. And
I am convinced that some Hispanic girl in junior high shoved Stephen Miller into a locker, and that's why he is the way he is.
Stephen Miller's been the way he is since at least high school. I mean, you can find footage of him in college talking about, we shouldn't have to clean up after ourselves. That's why we have janitors. There's tape of that exists. So whatever happened to him had happened a long time ago. And again, this is another guy who's gotten quite rich and quite successful doing what he does. There's no incentive for a guy like that to stop anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
So I find myself thinking, you reach who can be reached, but there are people that you are never going to convince, and you have to accept that there are just people that you don't have the tools, you don't have the reason for them to stop. And honestly, there are people doing amazing work in this field, people like Life After Hate. They're the ones that, like, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to get out of this, what do I do? That's who I'm going to go send you to talk to. Somebody like that, or somebody like Scott Kelly Ernest and Hands of Air, somebody who has, really done this kind of day-to-day hard de-radicalization kind of work with people. Those are the heroes. I mean, they don't necessarily get all the props and whatnot, but people who spend their time getting those people out are the ones that you really have to kind of take your hat off to and say, this person has really done great things for humanity.
I would just add one thing that's on like more of a structural or systemic level. I think I'm very glad I let you speak, not let you speak, but didn't speak over you. Is, by the way, are my dogs so loud that it's not worth listening to me?
No, it's
We can
fine. I can
deal
hear
with
you
it.
just
We can
fine.
deal with it.
Okay, I'll talk quick then. In addition, I just want to say that racism requires power. It's not something, it's misunderstood often. There's a difference between racism and bigotry, racism and prejudice. Racism entails structures of power. So a black woman cannot be racist against a white man because of the privilege that white men have, that's built in systemically into all of our institutions. It's why black women make so much less at their jobs, the same jobs. It's why they can't get the jobs. It's why they're disproportionately incarcerated, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the kind of thing that, Griff or Daryl Lamont Jenkins needs to diatribe about to someone who's thinking of leaving, but it is an important fact that everyone needs to know as a baseline. But what Griff is saying is absolutely critical. It requires listening, and then it requires these follow-up questions, because at the end of the day, it does often boil down to one or two anecdotes, or again, like I always refer to it, generations of disinformation. So once we found ourselves at an equal playing field, we're not about to fight, like we can have a civil conversation, maybe then we can start talking about the 1% versus the 99%. That it's not about race, it's about class.
So how do you
And
guys
it's amazing.
decide
I was
when
going to say one more thing, if I could.
Sure.
A guy like Tyler said this himself, that since he's been out of this, one of the things he's actually been watching a lot is, like, for instance, Hassan Piker streams. And he's like, I didn't realize how much of what that guy was saying was applicable to where we're at as a society. This is really, a lot of the time people like that are on board with the idea of big radical change. They just aren't looking at it the right way yet. You can find somebody who was already ready to make those huge changes in society and then kind of say, look, it's not really about like what you said, awkward. It's really about a class issue. They get us having these conversations. They shit on you guys and tell us that we're better, as it were, to keep us structurally shitting on you. But that's not really who we should be fighting with. Yeah, there's been generations of harm and trauma done, and we need to make up for that. But that's a conversation you can have after you get them to stop, being a part of whatever horrible outfit they're a part of.
How do you
That's a
distinguish
conversation.
when a conversation is worth continuing or ending?
They'll tell you. I mean, I'm pretty much, I'm in DMs with a lot of people. I have a lot of people who are on all sides of this kind of reach out and say things because, for what it's worth, I try to be an honest broker about this. I try to be very upfront and, yeah, I believe what I believe, but I'll talk to you. And I'm not going to tell you you're a horrible, awful person necessarily, unless you are, and you're really trying to get that. But I generally leave it open. And if you want to just keep talking, I've been talking to some of these people for like over a year, had, DMs here and there with people. And it's like, okay, I don't tend to think conversations end until somebody decides that they want to. I'll just, I'm here. You can message me. I'm around. Might take me a day or so. I'm kind of bad at returning DMs sometimes, but I'll get back to you and we can keep this going, because being that person that's sort of not part of their ideology, that's not on that team, I think is also very helpful for a lot of these people. So they have somebody that they don't feel like they have to be on stage with, somebody they can talk to and just say, okay, let's talk about baseball, or let's talk about jiu-jitsu, or let's talk about any number of other things that aren't necessarily this thing that everybody else is going to want to have the conversation with at first too. And when in a lot of cases, these people are willing to say, hey, I've got some questions, I've dealt with these people and now I can't really get my head back into this same place. I'm willing to have that conversation, and I'm willing to point you in the direction of people who are far more qualified to help you leave this thing than me. But I'll be there. That's fine. I don't mind doing that at all. And the reason I don't mind is because you were saying I have a different background. I should probably elaborate on that. I'm originally from Spokane, Washington, and I grew up in Spokane, Washington during the days of the order, during the days of, the Aryan nations doing literal white supremacist terrorism in my area. And we had an active Aryan Nations chapter the whole time I was a kid in Hayden Lake, Idaho. And they used to recruit at my high school. And
Wow.
I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, there was a skater kid, a skateboarder, like a lot of people. There was a kid who was a year younger named Russ Williams who kind of hung around, and he didn't really have any friends. I mean, people were prepared to tolerate him, but nobody really reached out to him, or, he was just kind of there, part of the scenery, basically. So I come back for my junior year. He comes back for his sophomore year, and he's a skinhead. And all of a sudden he's got braces and he's got boots and he's got the whole 9 yards. And it turns out he'd run across some of these guys over the summer, and they decided they were going to be his friend. And all you have to do is, just buy into what they're saying about the blacks and the Jews. They'll be your friends. And, that was bad. And then years later, I'm leaving my girlfriend's house and I see some kids that can't be any older than about 13 walking, and they're all skinhead out. I stop my car and get out of my car. I'm just like, what the hell? I don't know if I can swear on this show, so I'm trying really hard not to. What the hell? What are you doing? Why do you look like that? And the kid told me right up front, Russ Williams was my recruiter. And I found myself like, oh, Jesus. I don't know that I could have fixed that. I don't know that I could have changed that situation one iota, but I know that people have a need for human connection. People are lonely on a lot of levels. And if that is allowed to fester in certain directions, especially from people who are already very unhappy, because the average skater punk rock kid in the early 90s was not terribly thrilled with the way their life was going. It was still sort of a subculture for weirdos and losers at that point, right? So if you give these people an out that isn't necessarily a real healthy direction, but it's an out, a lot of the time they're going to take it. And I found myself thinking, maybe I could have done something different with this. Maybe I could have fixed it. I don't think I could have, but maybe I could have. So I've always been trying kind of ever since to, if somebody's in that position, just listen. Don't necessarily rule them out. Don't necessarily write them off. Listen to what they have to say. It's not going to kill me to hear your ideas. I grew up in that era. I grew up in that world. I'm fully familiar with the things that you say. It's not going to trigger me or upset me if you talk about these things. I can handle that. That's fine. So tell me, not just like what you think of the Jews, but like, how did you get here? Where did you get this idea? What was your thought process? Walk me through that. And it's interesting. Like I said, a lot of the time it comes down to one or two incidents when they were a kid. It's funny how often that happens, but I've heard that from other people too, that the origin story a lot of the time is some kind of childhood trauma.
That's a fantastic story. Thank you. That is a
sorry, I was rambling
story.
A little bit. Sorry about that.
No, I think I think that's really, thank you for your sincerity in it. Like I think it's a good thing that we don't lose perspective on that. Even, I hate to say it, but MAGAs are people too, with like real feelings and real history and real backgrounds and real events that led them to be where they are. And we can't just ignore all of that by just screaming Nazi at them.
And I get that we're all real mad at these people right now. I get that the things are really in a dark place. And I get that people are angry and frustrated and want to yell at somebody. But to me, the people you want to yell at are the people who are actually positioning them to do what they do. Those are the people to be mad at. What was that line from, God, I'm trying to remember the song. I didn't come for you, I came for your bosses.
Oh, yeah.
Was that Roscoe? I think that was Roscoe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I didn't come for you, I came for your bosses. And it was like, that's kind of how I felt about it.
I was supposed to know that, right, and help
No,
you.
I was supposed to
Yeah.
know that. I'm just bummed. I was like, hey, I'll ask the rap guy. He'll be able to catch
Yeah,
me on this one.
exactly. But yeah,
But
no, that's it, 100%.
mhm.
Like, come for the boss.
Well, and that's why I stopped arguing on Facebook with people in 2016. I completely stopped posting on Facebook. This is why I haven't accepted your friend request if you've friended me since then, because I just don't do it anymore. Because I'm not down to argue with my neighbors about this anymore. I'm not down to argue with people I had enough in common with at one point to want you on a social network, right? I want whoever's putting that propaganda into your head. I want the person who wrote that. I want Jack Posobiec. I want Roger Stone. I want Mike Cernovich. Those are the guys that I want to fight with if I'm going to fight with anybody. I'm not here to fight with the guy that, I've done some jiu-jitsu tournaments with and I've competed against a couple times. That person and I have common ground that at some point when we start taking all the bullshit out of it, we can get back to that. I'm convinced. I want the propagandists. That's who I view as the real problem here. Yes, these people are brainwashed. Let's take all that shit out of the conversation and see what happens then.
Okay. Sorry, I had
No
somebody
worries.
complaining there in the comments section. So sometimes it's hard to keep track of both. But it's somebody just yelling about TDS or whatever. So I think that's a good, it's a good breaking off point, I think. Like for us to just I think it's a good reminder that it's worth the effort to try and talk to people, but maybe just not have I like the way you distinguish between replying to people on you talked about DMing versus just having a Twitter war or something like that, because I think it really comes down to trying to establish a human connection. You're not gonna get somebody to cry mercy because they lost an argument. So in public or whatever.
Yeah, and I'd like
have had
to
some people change
respond
their mind,
to the person who says it's a TDS channel. I just happened to look at those comments and, I'm really sorry you feel that way, but
What does that
I'm
even mean?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I've just said that, I'm perfectly willing to listen to anybody on any side of this. Yeah,
What does that even mean, though, for
I
real?
think Trump's pretty terrible and I would like to see him gone.
I
Sure.
think it means that if you don't parrot whatever Trump says, then you've got TDS.
I don't, but
I'm just trying
literally,
to
what
figure
does
this
that
out.
stand for? I've never heard
Trump
it.
derangement
Trump
syndrome.
derangement syndrome.
Oh. So he's saying you have that?
I guess
Yes,
he's
I
saying
have
the
Trump
channel
derangement
does.
syndrome.
Your channel. Oh, wow. All right. Well, that
Huh.
person, I'll just, because, you're going to be nice about it. Whoever that is just so far off. It's ridiculous. You're clearly not paying attention and you haven't watched the show enough.
Yeah. I mean, if that's how you feel about
mean,
it, sorry
if
I
you,
see you go, but
yeah, I have no problem, clearly, as I also discussed the fight I had years ago. I don't defend myself, but if you fuck with my people, you're in trouble. And Griff is my person, so that's ridiculous. Get out of here.
what are you going to do? If this is how people
Come
feel
find,
about it, this is how
come
people
find
feel
me.
about it.
You can't convince everyone. I do
Nope.
think if you can just you don't have to convince everyone. He won by what? 2%?
No, you don't. Yeah.
So
Nope.
if you can convince 1 out of 50, then that changes the results. It's you don't need to convince everyone.
Yeah. And a lot of the
Yeah.
time, you don't need to convince these people. You don't need to do a lot. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, you just ask them questions until they. I've noticed if you can get one. It's like the water breaking down the dam. If you just get one little hole, then it's only a matter of time before the whole thing breaks down. And it's if you can get, I had one guy in before the last election that we were talking, and so he was talking about how they were, how Congo or whatever was sending over their prisoners, and so I asked him, have you ever checked on Congo's website to see if they're sending, are they saying that they're sending their prisoners? And if they are, why aren't they reporting that in Congo? So he did some Google searching and he was like, you've got a point. And then 2 days later, he was voting for Kamala. So I mean, it's like once you get them to question one thing, they can start questioning everything. But
Yeah.
I think we need to question things too. I'm not just saying that's a one-sided thing, but anyway.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Griff.
Thank you, Awkward. Thank
Appreciate
you,
you both
Kelly.
for coming on.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you for having me on.
Likewise.
That was a lot of fun.
So
Good.
did you want to pitch your podcast?
Yeah, so I run a podcast. It's called Did Nothing Wrong. We have done probably close to 200 episodes. We've shifted over to kind of more of a current events function these days, but we are located at didnothingwrongpod.com, and our archives are up there. We've interviewed everybody from, former members of Adam Waffen to Southern Poverty Law Center researchers to Awkward to former members of neo-Nazi terrorist groups. We have had quite a diverse batch of people on the show, and it's definitely something that you can learn something from. I've learned a ton over the time I've been doing it, talking to some of these people about where everything is. And if you want to check it out, feel free. Shoot me an email about it if you want to talk about it. Griff at didnothingwrongpod.com. I'm also on Blue Sky at Grizza at bluesky.social, I believe it is. Yeah, GRZA. And then, thanks again for having me on, guys. I really appreciate this. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks for coming on. Really enjoyed hearing what you have to say. I'll put all of that information in the descriptions on this podcast.
Excellent.
And when you
excellent.
message him, Griff, that is, do me a favor and let him know that he does want a new website. And that way I can do that for him.
We should talk about that. We should definitely talk about
will.
that, because I'm using the stock software on that at this point, as you can probably tell, like everybody probably does.
But what I also see is a nice landing page, a lot of subscribers, and a very cool show focused on politics at the intersection of extremist propaganda and Cold War 2.0. That's very, very cool. I would love to be involved in helping you get like
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
our body full force join up there.
Definitely.
And do you have anything you want to pitch there, Awkward?
Well, I pitched Griff, I think, enough today. I pitch you as well, Kelly. I am enjoying these weekly talks, and until you kick me off, I'll keep coming on and trying to bring cool guests for you. Again, if you missed it earlier, I do really recommend checking out Noelle Cook. Her book is coming out soon. It fits very well with the predominant subject of this conversation, fascism and anti-fascism. And as I always do, I also recommend checking out my other good friend, Kat Brooks, who based in Oakland, finished second. She was a runner-up in the mayoral election a few years ago, but most importantly has dedicated her entire life to fighting against police violence and protecting families from police violence and helping them deal with it when it does happen. She takes way too much heat, probably more than Griff and I even do, like by a lot. And it's absurd. She's extraordinary Black woman who just gives everything of herself. So I would also check her out as well. Yeah, you know where to find me.
So yeah, just send me links for any of that, and I'll also put those in the description. So
all right, we'll do. Thank you so much.
All right,
thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it very much.
All right, peace.
Great rest of
Have
your
a good weekend. Yeah.